All right, guys. Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to go through some tips and help you kind of guide you guys through the CPRE process. And we're so happy that you guys have decided to join us. Just keep in mind that everything that we'll go over today is probably on the NRPA website or within the study guides. And we also have this amazing book too, and a lot of the information you can find is in this big book, the Management of Parks and Recreation Agencies. So if you've got any questions, save them for the end. We'll be live at the end to answer some questions and go over anything else that you feel you need a little bit more guidance on.
Hi, my name's Billy Ovitt. I'm a recreation superintendent with the City of Raleigh Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources. I oversee most of our active recreation activities, aquatics, athletics, tennis, and health and wellness. I got my CPRE exam or certification probably back in 2012, I believe. So it's been a little while since I take the test, but I've been helping members of our department prepare for their CPRP exam. So there's a lot of things that will translate for those of you that already have that certification.
Hi, I'm Phil Fleischman. I am also CPRE certified. I currently serve as the Parks and Recreation Director for the town of Chapel Hill. And I've been with Chapel Hill for about the last year and a half. Prior to that time, I worked for a number of years with Greensboro Parks and Recreation in a variety of roles. And then also earlier in my career had a role with the City of Raleigh and with Mecklenburg County. I took my CPRE exam probably about 6 years ago. So like Billy, it's been a little while for me. However, I also teach a class as an adjunct instructor at UNC Greensboro, and we utilize the management textbook that Kristen referenced earlier in the presentation. So excited to be here with you all this morning.
And I'm Kristen Herndon. I'm the Facilities and Aquatics Coordinator for Greensboro Parks and Recreation. I've only been with Greensboro for a little over 6 months, and I received my CPRE certification in late 2019. So I am the freshest to have their certification. The learning objectives that we're going to go over today are to identify the requirements to take the CPRE exam, to discuss the content area, overview, and exam structure, and identify available resources and strategies for successful test preparation.
So the qualification requirements in order to take the test, and by the way, the test is administered by NRPA, the National Recreation and Park Association, and so you can find all of this information on their website. But the qualification requirements, you must meet one of the following: either have a CPRP certification and a bachelor's degree and 5 years of professional experience, or hold a current CPRP certification and have a master's degree or higher and 4 years of professional full-time manager experience. So it is a combination of first having your CPRP certification, having a bachelor's or master's degree, and then a relevant amount of experience in the field based off of that.
So a lot of times when we were able to do these sessions live, we would, have some interaction here and ask why you're interested in becoming a CPRE. I asked some of my coworkers here in Raleigh, and I won't read the whole quote from Joel Bateman, but he, a lot like myself, he found himself working out at Forest Ridge Park that has a lot of partners on that property, and he found himself just needing a slightly different skill set, wanting to push himself to make sure that what he was hearing from different agencies was accurate and the best practices. So he pursued it, and he's found it to be very helpful in the management of that property. Likewise, when I moved into a new role, I found myself being asked to do different things on a daily basis. So I found the certification really forced me to go and challenge myself and hone the skills in more of a supervisory management arena rather than some of the skills that are supported through the CPRP exam.
So I think for me, I've always been one to seek professional development opportunities. And when I sought out the CPRE, it was still a fairly new certification that NRPA had introduced. I had been a CPRP for a while. I had attained my master's degree, and I was really seeking some additional professional development learning opportunities within the field. And so the CPRE seemed like the next logical thing that I would pursue. I think it's really important for myself as well as other professionals in the field to always seek opportunities to improve one's skills and to demonstrate that you have the skills and the knowledge necessary for whatever it is that you may want to do in the field. So for me, I sought after the CPRE certification for that reason.
And I believe for me, the reason I wanted to get it, it's very similar to both what Phil and Billy mentioned, but I kind of just wanted to continue to show my commitment to the field of parks and recreation. I wanted to also take that next step, kind of like what Phil said. I'd obtained my master's. I'd been in the field for a little while. So CPRE certification kind of just seemed like the next direction to go. Also, I kind of wanted to back up my self-esteem. I knew that, getting this certification would kind of help me improve like some career opportunities or some advancement opportunities. And also as a young professional, I kind of just wanted to get out there and prove that I could do it. I wanted those letters behind my name. So that was a reason I went out and I got that certification. So a little bit about the overview and the structure of the exam. There are 5 main subject areas that you'll be studying to prepare for this exam. And there's also a percentage that you'll see right next to the specific subject areas, and those refer to the amount of questions on the exam. So there's 18% of the questions that refer to communication, 11% for finance, 23% for human resources, 31% on operations, and 18% on planning and policy. And currently there's 150 questions on the exam, and only 125 of those questions are actually counted towards the exam, but you don't know which 25 of those questions aren't counted towards your grading of the exam. And I know Billy will kind of get into that a little bit later on into the presentation.
All right, so for the communication section, for those of you that have taken the CPRP exam, there's not a lot of difference in the subject areas they're covering. They're going to be talking a lot about promoting the benefits and the value of your program. Using the NRPA has established 3 pillars: the conservation, health and wellness, and the equity pillars. So they're going to be asking you questions that really talk about how, as a professional or how, as an executive in this case, would you share that message with your community. They will place an emphasis on collaboration. So you may get questions about which stakeholder groups you should conduct a survey with. They will talk about the different types of surveys. They will talk about the importance of building partnerships with community organizations, whether they're in some agencies, you may collaborate with youth athletic agencies, you may coordinate with your school systems. It may just be a collaboration of internal work groups within your division, within your department. You're also looking on building those relationships. So your elected officials, in some agencies, you may have a lot of interaction with your elected officials, and other organizations, larger ones like Raleigh, it may be a little bit more distant with more layers in between you and those elected officials. You may have boards and commissions that you have to report out to and develop plans and visioning documents with. At a point, everybody gets the job of being part of media relations and telling the good story and not always waiting for the bad story to happen. So they're going to ask questions about how you can gain support from your local media. With everything we do working in Parks and Recreation, customer relations is always a topic, and that never goes away at any level in your career. Professionalism, the exam will really want to drive home the idea of supporting your chain of command. So again, larger organizations, you may have a very rigid chain of command that you're expected to follow. Smaller organizations, it may be a little more relaxed and casual. However, and we'll go through this in some of the other areas, don't allow your organization's setup or policies drive your decision-making on the test. This is best practices, so nothing is perfect or exactly the way that you're gonna be handling things in your organization. Also within communication, they're gonna be looking for you as an executive to be able to provide input on organizational reports, but also the ability to communicate policies and procedures through your organizations for understanding and for implementation.
So the second of the 5 subject areas covered within the exam is finance. And I know most of you did not get into this field because you wanted to be an expert in finance and money and budgets and things like that, but yet it is a very important area and a very important skill because it's really how we get the work done that we are charged with doing in our communities. And so for this exam, there are really kind of 4 subtopics within finance that we've identified: budget, expenditures and revenue, data and documentation, and resource development. And so the first one of these areas is the budget. There are questions on the exam that cover budget development and administration, identifying the difference between operating, capital, and program budgets, and which would be most appropriate and most effective given different scenarios. There is also information included or questions included around how you create needs and justifications for your budgets. Also information in budgeting around establishing areas of responsibility for effective budget management, and then how you as a staff person or as a manager can operate effectively within your existing budgets and tools to do that. Within expenditures and revenue, there are questions around fees and charges and knowing different philosophies related to cost recovery and how that might be applied given a different model or interest in a program area. Looking at ways to effectively manage resources, cash resources that are coming in through cash handling procedures and fee collection procedures. And then also there's a need to know about revenue and expenditure forecasting, how you might do that given different scenarios that might present themselves on the exam. The third area within the budget category is data and documentation. And if you work with finances at all within your agency, you know that data and documentation are really essential. So this is looking at different aspects of financial and operating data. It may be revenue or expenditure related. It may be attendance related. It may be related to evaluations. But all of those things roll up in this area as well. Looking at different types of contracts and agreements that can be established and how those things can be administered and managed. And then finally, resource development. So this is a big theme and it has been in our field for many years, the notion of doing more with less. And so this is looking at kind of alternative sources, alternative resources that you could utilize to benefit your agency. Things such as grants, sponsorships, aspects of privatization. Along the lines of these things, it's an interest in do you know how to do research around these topics and how you might prepare requests so that you and your agency could be successful in generating some of these alternative resources. Asset management is also an area covered by the exam. So human resources, in contrast to finance, which is probably not something that's of the highest level of interest to all of you, human resources is likely a very interesting topic to you. And I know that when I took the exam, this is a section that I recall that I did really well in. And I think it's because at that point in my career, I had a lot of experience managing human resources, as many of you likely do as well. So this is a section, though, that we still encourage you to look at the study guide and the materials in the text for this, because agencies do things slightly different, and you do want to make sure that you are looking at the best practices within the field and you're studying from the materials available, in addition to utilizing and relying upon your practical experience. So in this subject area, there are 4 subcategories: recruitment and hiring, policies and procedures, performance management, and supervision. So with recruitment and hiring, this is looking at things like the creation of job descriptions and how to create an effective job description, different models of hiring processes, and how you might develop and implement different hiring strategies given the level of the position and the complexity of the position, the skills required to make sure that you're getting the best candidate for the role that you have. This is also an area that looks at training and onboarding for new staff and what that should look like. In the policies and procedures realm, and really policies and procedures is probably a subtopic that could go in any of these 5 broader subject areas, but particularly as it relates to human resources and personnel management, it's looking at how policies and procedures can come to be developed, what those should look like, how enforcement takes place with policies and procedures. So think about training and then accountability aspects there, and then how policies and procedures might be evaluated over time and changed to meet the needs of the organization. And I think there's a good diagram there on the screen that we found online that really can be applied to most any process. And we would encourage you to think about this as you're studying for the exam, and then also as you're working through scenario-based questions. And that's looking at a process where you're identifying the issue, you're looking at possible solutions to it, and step number 2, planning and formulation. You're then implementing whatever decision you're making. You're monitoring the effects of that decision, and then there's an evaluation and an opportunity to kind of change or tweak your process moving forward. So moving on to the next slide, with performance management, and this is a big aspect really of management in any type of field. But really here it's thinking about and having you to think about how you might evaluate employees, models for doing that, the frequency with which you might do that, formal and informal evaluation. It is looking at and making sure that you have a basic level of understanding between different disciplinary actions and when you might apply those given different situations. Also looking at a complaint or a grievance procedure for employees to grieve decisions that may be made or to bring forward concerns. In this realm as well, looking at guidance and motivation of staff. That's a really big thing for managers and leaders, is not just establishing right and wrong and policies and procedures, but and evaluating staff, but how do you motivate your team to really be effective and to help your organization as it moves towards its desired state, its vision, goals, and objectives. So that's things along the lines of job skills development as well, and different ways to do that. And then finally, supervision. So supervision techniques for volunteers, interns, and employees, models that you might follow for that, such as general versus direct supervision or transitional supervision, looking at classification and compensation systems, and this may fall back under the policies and procedures realm as well, but how you might determine what classification and compensation system your agency pursues, resources that you might make available to your employees, and then finally labor relations, which for the most part, this is not something that in North Carolina in Parks and Recreation we deal a whole lot with, unions, collective bargaining, things of that nature. But keep in mind, this is a test that's administered nationally, and in many different states, this is more applicable.
Okay, so moving right along to operations, there's a lot of information within operations, and also, if I remember correctly, it has the most percentage of questions within this subject area. So we've pulled out a couple things just to hit on as we move through, but there's a lot on operations. And like Phil and Billy have also mentioned, everything kind of ties back together anyways. So first up with contracts, as a manager, you have to deal with a lot of contracts, whether it's, supplies or renting or liability transfers, waivers. There's a lot to learn about contracts and how they're used, how they should be written, or if they can be oral. And then the elements that are within a contract too, you're going to want to know that it needs to have an offer, an acceptance, and a consideration. And then who you can't sign a contract with. Those are all a couple things about contracts that you're going to want to know. It also goes into the fact that there's for-profit, nonprofit, and public recreation, and kind of the difference between those three sectors. There's also a lot of information on action research, evaluations, need assessments, and data analysis, and how all of those tie together to get the executive the information they need. So particularly, what within action research is the professional and their team doing? And how can you perform evaluations? And then with those needs assessments, what's being done or not being done? And how can we get the information out? And can we use surveys? Can we use focus groups? And then with the data analysis, everything that you get from those evaluations, the research and the needs assessment, how can we now figure out this information that we can improve our organization now? And not only for ourselves, but how can the public learn about this information? And for me, with data analysis, it kind of took me back to grade school, because you've got to relearn mean, median, and mode. And then also like the range. So it's like all these things that you forgot about that you thought you were never going to have to use again. They come back about in that book, and you'll actually use them for some of the questions on the test. Moving on to policies and procedures. I know Phil hit on this a little bit in HR, but why have policies and procedures, and what's the difference between a policy and a procedure, and how do we use these procedures in our every day-to-day operations for an organization? And really just trying to figure out, why are we using them? Well, they provide fair and consistent treatment for everyone across the board. It's to maintain compliance with state and federal regulations. So for example, OSHA, or for those who have their certified playground instructor or certified playground certification, through the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Those are two that are highlighted within the book also. It's really about protection for not only employees, but for the agency as a whole and as participants who come to our programs and participate in things, or our facilities. And then also it just saves in time and money, because there's not as much confusion when it's implemented and it's the same across the board. So some other topics that are really hit on in the operations section. I think a lot of us remember LEED from the CPRE. And just as a reminder, it means leadership in energy and environmental design. But, you know, this program, which was developed by the Green Building Council, it promotes basically an approach to sustainability. So how can your organization do those approaches to become more sustainable and save on energy? And really it talks about, you know, water savings, energy efficiency, indoor environmental quality, and really how you can obtain those silver, gold, and platinum kind of trophies or awards that they hand out. There's also the U.S. Department of Energy, and they also highlight some of the best practices also. So their main one, of course, is just planning to plan. So how can you incorporate sustainable goals and practices really into a strategic plan? And also just documenting, using equipment only when it's needed, things like that. Also, there's maintenance plans. And maintenance plans kind of go along with the same energy and efficiency that almost LEED hits on. It's critical to the success of an organization to have a maintenance plan. And really, how are you going to develop and implement these maintenance plans so you can become more efficient across the board? And last but definitely not least, the book and the test hit on reasonable accommodations. As we know, a reasonable accommodation is assistance or changes to a position or workplace that will enable an employee to do their job despite having a disability, whether that be physical or mental. It goes through the history, how the American with Disabilities Act was enacted in 1992, and how whether your buildings or facilities or programs, specifically buildings as it relates to operations, that if you go and you alter it in any way, that it needs to be ADA compatible. Or if you're building a new facility, how you have to make sure you take all the reasonable accommodations into the process. So site plans, really there's a lot of plans that are hit on in operations, but specifically right now we'll talk about site plans. And really a site plan is like a bird's eye view of a specific property. And it is drawn to scale. And it differs from a master plan in that it's specific to just like this one property. And a site plan can show, you know, property lines, parking lots, and the parking spaces, how many parking spaces would be allowed like in that parking lot. Driveways, trails, surrounding natural landscapes, and then like the distance between property lines, facilities. And as you can see in the picture below, it kind of gives you a roundabout idea of what it looks like. And they'll have ideas, or they'll have pictures in the book also, but you'll see the tennis court and the recreation center, how many parking spots they believe you can get with that size of a parking lot, as well as what's adjacent to the tennis court and trails. So then it gets into risk management. And I think compared to the CPRP, when the CPRE talks about risk management, it kind of takes it a level higher. If we can remember with CPRP, it was all about participant safety and the risks involved with participants. But within this book and for the test, it really goes in deeper to the risk management process. And you can kind of see the graph or the little roundabout picture I have here on the screen. That you've got to identify the risk. How are you going to assess the risk? how is your team and the risk manager going to control that risk? And then you've got to evaluate and review how your team is doing with that risk. Regardless of the size of your department, everyone needs to have a risk management process and everyone needs to have a risk management plan. Okay, so now we head into planning, and I think we've definitely hit on, you've got to plan, and that's definitely what the CPRE study guide and the book go into. And as I've mentioned in the earlier in the presentation, there are so many plans, from risk management to comprehensive master plan, strategic plan, capital improvement plan, program plans, risk management plans. So you've got to plan, and we're going to hit on a couple things that are involved in planning for the future. So first and foremost, you need to definitely involve your community, whether that's being stakeholders, user groups, volunteers, or definitely the staff. Whenever you're planning for the future, you're going to need to involve those people that are most important to your organization. As we've also talked about earlier, you're going to have to identify needs, whether that means a needs assessment or focus groups or surveys. You're going to need to know what you're going to work on. And then collecting that public input, like I just mentioned, whether it's through surveys or focus groups, and then analyzing those trends. With a capital improvement plan, this is the largest plan. So the most common financing alternatives available for public agencies and nonprofits are current revenues, accumulated reserve funds, gifts and donations, grants, and borrowing. And capital improvement plans usually are usually around because of large purchases. So acquisition of land, construction of brand new facilities, and major repairs or replacements to existing facilities or equipment. But this is the main reason there is a CIP around. And then as an agency, you have to comply with, as I've mentioned earlier, also state and federal and local rules, laws, codes. So how, as an agency, are you going to comply? And it goes in a little bit deeper, but you've got to work with policymakers to develop policies and their processes. And since an organization is basically a collection of people with different responsibilities, all going for that same goal and that same purpose, i.e. a mission, a value, a goal. So the mission, value, and goals of your specific organization, it's necessary to organize that work for maximum efficiency. So you've got to make sure you've got your organizational structure kind of in line and what people are really working towards. And then property acquisition, this is definitely on the test. I would definitely know the difference between fee simple absolute and less than fee simple, and really what those entail. So fee simple absolute means purchasing land, or you obtain land by a gift or a dedication, or it's an exchange or a transfer. And then less than fee simple means you're obtaining that land by a joint agreement, or you're leasing it, or it's a permit. So definitely knowing the difference between all of those. And then also knowing the water rights and how to dispose of land properly. And also how you now as a manager have to lead to protect your land, that you just can't let your land sit there, because unfortunately there's other people out there who would love to encroach on your land a little bit.
So now that we've talked about the content of the exam, we want to start talking about preparing to actually take the exam. For most of you, it's probably been a while, according to the requirements, at least 4 years since you've been in school. So taking a test may be a little daunting at this point. There are resources available. We've shown you the textbook, the Management of Parks and Recreation Agencies, that's shown on your screen now. Also on NRPA's website, there's a CPRE certification center, and there they have the CPRE preparatory resource and the candidate handbook. The preparatory resource is going to be one of your best friends as you start studying the content for this test. So a few slides ago, Kristen was talking about fee simple and simplified fee simple, and you might have been thinking, wait, I have no idea what this is. If you go to the CPRE preparatory resource, there's a planning and policy section. You can find fee simple and other conservation easements, things like that, and it'll tell you exactly where in this textbook to go read up on it, complete with chapter and page numbers. So while we want you to know everything, and the writers of the textbook want you to know everything, you can use these tools that are shown on your screen, and they'll be available for your handouts to really dial in the content that you need for this exam. So as you start to prepare for the exam, got a few things to remember. You know, you're taking a test, so you're going to have to dig back into your college and high school days and figure out what study techniques work for you. For some people, like myself, if you write it down, it's ingrained. You will never forget it, even if you try. For others, you may need to do flashcards, note cards, study groups. Just find something that works for you to make sure that you can take in this content, learn it, digest it, and be able to apply it in a testing situation. Take the sample test, take practice exams. All of the answer keys will kind of help you identify where your weak subject areas are. And if you have to choose, focus on those areas and strengthen those up. There's practice tests available. There's definitely more practice tests available for the CPRE test, but that's still going to give you practice taking a test. And these tests are developed by the National Certification Board. It's a mix of professionals and professors. So not all of the tests are asked in the same way that you or I might ask them. So just review as many practice tests as you can, get a feel for how they're going to ask questions. And also, like we're sharing our resource, talk to others in your organization or around the state who have taken the test recently that can provide you insight. And then always don't count on your organizational structure to help you in this situation, because the test is written towards best practices. When you get to test time, just prepare to do your best. You're going to get a good night's sleep the night before. All the things we tell our kids as they're getting ready for school. Know where your testing center is. So the testing center that I took mine here in Raleigh is located in the basement of one of our police precincts. I had never seen that there was a bottom floor to that building until the day I showed up, but luckily I got there in enough time to figure it out. Know from your CPRP handbook, they're going to tell you what your testing center policies are, but you will need to be prepared to show a valid photo ID. So if your license is expired, they may not accept it. So make sure you have a valid ID. Prepare on leaving any personal devices, cell phones in your car. Dress in layers. It is a testing center. You may be in a space with multiple people taking multiple exams from various professions. You may be sitting next to someone taking an engineering certification on one side of you and a nursing exam on the other side. But for that, often it may be chilly or not as comfortable as you like it in your office. So take layers so you can adjust. And it's a computer-based test. So for some people, this could be daunting. There are practice exams available through NRPA where you can practice doing tests on the exams. I know a lot of our organization is moving towards our monthly trainings are online, but it could be a new experience for you. So just be prepared for that and know that it will be a computer-based test. So as you get there, you're going to want to develop a pace for yourself. So you're going to have 150 questions, as Kristen mentioned. 25 of them are not counted towards your score, but you won't know which ones they are. So you need to plan on going in to answer all questions. You do not lose points if you miss a question. That's going to give you about 70 seconds for each question to work through it. Read them carefully and thoroughly. As I mentioned earlier, the questions are written also by professors. So sometimes they're intentionally giving you information that's not necessary. So really break down the question, figure out what they're asking. It may not matter what color the streamers are for the party, but what matters is the number of guests coming, or the number of hours they're going to be in your facility. Really, really try to drive down what they're asking you. Also, eliminate as many questions as possible. So if you see the answers, so they're all multiple choice, and if you see the answers are all numbers, play with the numbers you find in the text of the question, and you may be able to eliminate 2 or 3 of them right off the bat, just because you can't find a way to do any reasonable math to get to those numbers. And finally, if you just can't find an answer or come to a conclusion, skip it and come back to the end. So the computer system that they do the test on allows you to flag the question so that you can even put little notes on it and say, I'm thinking it's either A or B, but I want to come back to it. And so when you come back, you'll have those notes. So feel free to do that and double check. Because I found when I took my last exam, I had about 30 minutes left at the end, and I went through and I probably changed 4 or 5 questions that when I reread them. And I think Kristen had a similar experience.
Yeah, so I actually ended up taking the test twice. The first time I failed, I had missed passing by I think it was 7. And really, I remember not having a lot of time at the end to look and review my answers. And I kind of did 2 different strategies. So the second time I went through, I did the strategy that Billy just mentioned, that you can flag and come back to the answers that you're unsure of or require too much time at the end. And really, I had a little over an hour once I went through the test completely to go back through, not only to review, but to answer those. Of course, the finance and the math questions are what took me the longest. And I knew that was my weakest point going in. So I had a lot of time. And then that second time I passed. So also, I'll just note that the test is going to say, what's the best answer? It asks that a lot. And you'll look at the answers and you'll be able to hopefully eliminate 1, if not 2. But then you're going to see that you're going to have to choose between 2 or 3 because, well, yeah, those all look that they're going to work perfect. But what's the one that NRPA is wanting? And I know both Billy and Phil have mentioned this. So what's the best answer, or the way that NRPA wants you to answer, basically?
And I'll just come back to, for me personally, the best preparation I did for the CPRE exam was I grabbed the CPRP exam study guide and went through the practice test on that. Again, you're going to read the textbook, you're going to learn the content of the test as we've outlaid earlier. But when it comes down to, game day, so to speak, it's you versus the test. And the more practice you can get taking a test that was written by the same group of individuals, whether it's for the CPRP exam or the CPRE exam, it's going to get you back into that flow of, how do I do a multiple choice test? Pick C is probably not your best strategy. So, work on some strategies to figure out, how am I going to eliminate what they're doing? What's the best answer? When we do review sessions with staff, we playfully argue over which is the best answer many, many, many times. So those are the ones that'll probably catch you up and get you kind of frustrated as you study. But the more tests you can do, you'll start to get a feel for it.
And, really, just to add to that, there's no position that I know of that requires the CPRE versus the CPRP. So really, there's no reason for you to be in a rush to feel like you need to rush taking the exam or signing up to take it once you're eligible to do so. So it really is in your best interest to take your time to look at the preparatory guide like Billy referenced, to get this management textbook, which, by the way, is over 700 pages. You see that it's a very fat textbook, but the preparatory guide will tell you which specific pages you should be reviewing within that text. And so, as you're thinking ahead and you want to take the test, just giving yourself enough time well in advance to read through materials, make some notes. I mean, that would be a suggestion that I would have for all of you, and that's something I know that I kind of followed along with, is I never really wanted to feel rushed to have to take it. But you know, the CPRE, it is kind of that highest level of certification in our field. So you know, that's why you know, one reason why we've all chosen to pursue it, and we would encourage all of you to as well.
And I applaud Phil and Billy, because I'm pretty sure you guys didn't have a study guide when you took the test, correct? That wasn't even around. So those going into it and thinking about taking it now, you've kind of already got a leg up to help you study, because it definitely just points you to the pages of where that specific subject or what you want to learn more about. It points you to where it is in that 700-page book, instead of having to read it front to back, which I would say you're going to want to read it front to back anyways, but at least now you know where specific subjects are within the book.
Yeah, I think when I took it, the study resource was a list of about 15 textbooks that were probably all 400 plus pages long. So,
right.
Yeah, definitely there's a lot of information out there for you. One last note on the testing. So when you sit down to start the test, you will go through kind of 10, I'll call them playful sample questions. They'll ask you what shape is on the screen, just so you can get a feel for picking the right answer and going through it. And then you will tell it, okay, I'm ready to start the test. You'll have a timer on the screen. And then at the end, when you finally click submit, like for me, there was a big kind of, you know, holding my breath. I clicked submit. I was expecting to see my score pop up. And then it goes into some optional demographic questions. So it's kind of a letdown. And then you get your score when you checked out at my testing center where I went. So just do know there's 10 questions at the beginning, so you get a chance to get a feel for the layout of the screen and everything. So now, once you get certified, very much like those of you that are CPRP now, you are expected to continue growing yourself, getting CEUs. So the CPRE certification is a 3-year cycle instead of a 2-year cycle. It's the same pace of 1 CEU a year. You can get CEUs multiple ways, attending conferences, I guess like you are now, doing the distance learning courses that NCRPA offers. If any of you are working on college degrees, you can use those college credits to get some equivalency. Some professionals have had good success petitioning for CEUs through training opportunities through their agencies. I haven't ever done this one, but there are some people that have done it. NCRPA does a monthly webinar series where there are CEUs available, and depending on your agency's membership, sometimes those are free. And then professional service experience credits. So if you, like the 3 of us are doing, are presenting at this conference, we will be able to apply to get a CEU for presenting, or part of a CEU. You can also, if you're serving on a leadership committee within your state organization or the NCRPA, if you're on some committee for that, you can apply for credits for that, as well as conference planning and things like that. And that's all available on the CPRE resource that's located on NCRPA's website with the forms and how you do that. So.
All right, guys. Well, now it's your turn to kind of see what you got. We've got a quiz, 15 questions for you, and they do relate to some of the information we just went over. The questions come from some of the study guide questions that are provided through NCRPA, some questions that the 3 of us came up with. But if you want to click the link here at the bottom of the page highlighted in blue, and if that doesn't work, we'll provide it in the chat, and we'll meet you on the live side of this presentation so we can go over the answers and also be able to answer any questions you guys have or any other further guidance that you guys may want to pursue getting this certification. So we really appreciate you guys joining in, and we hope you learned a little something today about prepping to take the CPRE.